Welcome to M&A's Church Planting and Renewal Conversations. I'm Chris Vogel, Director of Next Gen Pastors, and I serve M&A as the Director of Ecosystem Development. Well, every pastor is an interim pastor. So that's the opening line of the book, Next, by William Vanderbloom and Warren Bird. 5 years ago, having planted and pastored the same church for 23 years, I began considering what the next steps might be for me, and that line struck me between the eyes. What plans had I made for transition, and how was I guiding my session to even begin that conversation about it? Well, I've heard it said that any time a founding pastor leaves, or a pastor with a double-digit tenure, an interim pastor is quite prudent. There are also those situations in which the church has experienced trauma, perhaps due to a moral or ethical failure by a pastor. In fact, it could be a pastor who is leaving is much loved, highly regarded, whose departure needs to be softened before the next pastor comes on the scene. And few of us handle transitions well in any situation. How should a church position herself for the future? What might they consider for the next leader who comes along? Then there is that question for those of us who have perhaps served as pastors for many years. We're looking for that next phase, what our ministry might be. We may not want the full weight of that senior pastor position, but have years ahead and loads of experience. Guiding a church through change would be a great opportunity given the wisdom and the experience accrued. The fact is, in our denomination, the PCA, we speak of stated supply, but not often using the term interim pastor. We imagine that sometimes I think that we as pastors in sessions, we have all that we need to shift easily and seamlessly from one pastor to the next, only perhaps too late to find out it's never that easy. Well, I am pleased to have with us today a number of people to discuss and talk about what it means to have interim pastors. And so with us, we have Tom Harris. He's the president of Interim Pastor Ministry. Beginning in 1997, Tom served as his first role as an interim pastor, and over the next 15 years, served 9 other churches. Also, Jerry Curran, who is presently serving at Safe Harbor on beautiful Kent Island in the middle of the Chesapeake, just outside of Annapolis. This is Jerry's 5th church with IPM. Larry Dawn is in between gigs right now. He's presently talking to a church in Pennsylvania, having served in Mississippi and Iowa in the PCA. And after his retirement, he served in churches in Pennsylvania, Iowa, northwestern Minnesota. And I think you just came from that, serving there right before COVID hit, as a matter of fact. And I also see that Dave Jenkins has joined us. And Dave, I didn't write down all of your bio, and so in a bit, you can introduce yourself as well. But Dave works with interim pastors as the helping with issues of placement and what have you. Well, as always, before we jump in, I want to encourage you who are attending. You have the opportunity to shoot us questions, and so either using the chat box or the Q&A box, write us the questions. If you're on Facebook, I probably won't be able to see your questions as easily, but I'll give that a try as it's on my other screen. But shoot us some questions as we're moving along, and we will try to answer them. And to our panelists, didn't get a chance to mention this to you earlier, open up those screens. If you see a question you want to answer, just interrupt and we'll jump in with that right away. So let me just start off. Tom, what is an interim pastor? Is he a placeholder or a stand-in until the real guy comes along? What's his role, his job?
I would say that until about 30 years ago, that's what an interim pastor was, a placeholder, someone to hold the fort until the new guy comes. And yet about 30 years ago, a group that started us realized that was insufficient for them. 6 leaders of a certain denomination, they formed IPM because they needed more for churches in transition. So I think we're transitional, but I think we're transactional and also transformational. If we become skilled and strategic and build that upon many years of faithful and fruitful ministry.
Well, good. So, I'll throw this often actually out to everyone too, but what is easier to answer? So, describe a situation that can benefit from an interim, or a church that doesn't really need to even consider an interim. So, posing that together. So, help us understand what churches need it, or is there a situation you go, you really don't need it. You're fine as you are.
I'm going to look for the other guys to share some answers here soon, but this is kind of a president question. I think every church would profit if they had a very skilled, strategic, of course, deeply in love with the Lord, interim pastor. I think they don't know what they could have, and there's not been enough pastors trained, that this coupling is not occurring as much as it could be, or I would say should be, because the church is the bride of Christ, and she is being beautified, and we need to prepare her for the wedding in heaven. So I think any church, I think a church that's in transition, generally in transition, could profit from good preaching, good shepherding, multi-staff church, good leadership with the staff. That's where problems can come in transition. When the mouse is away, the cat's away, the mice will play, they say. And we've encountered many churches that realized in transition that they had a staff issue that had to be resolved. I think the congregants loved to see the presence of a steady voice, but not just a voice from the pulpit, but a handshake, a greeting during the week to be fulfilling all that's expected of a pastor. But then there's churches that are in some kind of form of crises. We're watching churches declining. We know that 60 to 80% of all churches in America are declining. We know that 3,500 to 7,000 close each year. With COVID, the churches that were 120 are now calling us with 40 or 50 attenders. But they still need, because they've got to regather and they've got to put energy in to try to reconstitute what was. We're also finding a lot of pastors are retiring early because they don't have the energy, or they're so discouraged what's happened during COVID. They're taking earlier retirements. So we've had at least 17 to 20 churches that are under 100 contact us in the last month looking for help. That's unprecedented, but I believe that's a casualty of COVID. And then there's some churches that need a tune-up. Some churches need to be able to see in the windshield where God's leading them. Some churches need to glance in the rearview mirror to see like a little mess that was never properly cleaned up, or an elephant in the room, either visually or invisible, that may be stomping around, kind of killing the church, or at least restraining it from real good gospel ministry. And then there are those that are really in crises, churches that have descended from, one we just served descended from 4,000 to 1,000 in about 8 years. They needed us terribly. We have a lot of churches that are under 100 that have been seeing decline over the last decade. We see churches where there's conflict on the leadership board, churches that have released pastors and they've lost trust by the congregants when the leadership did that. We've seen adultery where we followed the pastor. We followed a pastor once a few years ago that committed adultery, but also before being found out committed suicide. So we have seen a lot of situations. I've seen churches, a PCA church that had a couple $1 million confiscated by a Christian school administrator and by a pastor. And we've seen a Baptist church in Grand Rapids that saw a confiscation of $300,000 through credit card fraud by the pastor. But there are extreme cases, but any case that's inhibiting the working of the Holy Spirit, or he is not free to roam and run in the hearts and lives of the church, I think transition is the most perfect time to address, correct, and then to redirect toward a positive future.
Oh, that's great. Thank you. Thank you. Yeah. Any of you guys, any thoughts about that yourself? Any input? Be sure to unmute yourself if you begin to talk.
I would agree with Tom on that. Certainly a church that's having difficulty in transition could benefit from not just a skilled and experienced, but a professionally trained transition person who knows how to categorize and classify conflict and figure out the appropriate solutions. But also churches that aren't particularly experiencing any problems, they still have to answer the question of what comes next. What's God's future for this church over the next 10 years? And what kind of pastor can help lead us to that? And often when the pastor retires or leaves, churches find out that there are different voices in the congregation having different answers to that, both in leadership and in the congregation. And it helps to have someone with some experience and training who can help bring those voices together in unity and chart out a path for the future, even with an effective church, because then you can answer the question, what kind of pastor do we need to help us lead us into that future? Because pastors come in all varieties and skills and abilities. And so you have to figure out what are the top skill sets that our next pastor needs. And to answer that question, you have to ask, where is God leading us in the future? And a process that counts, gives opportunity for all voices to be heard, but then coalesces into a unified vision is not only strengthening for the church, even if it was already strong, but it unifies the church and gives a clear direction for the next pastor.
We always say that a healthy church is always under construction. And ceasing to put energy in thought and prayer into the current reality can cause us to be a church that thinks it's at its peak, but is not aware that it's over the hill slightly. And then gravity can pull it quickly. So I agree with you. A healthy church can prosper from regrouping, refocusing, the presence of a pastor that's there 24/7, clarifying mission and vision. And our interim pastors are also trained in elemental skills of coaching search teams, search committees, call committees.
Okay, good. So you're talking about the training, Larry or Jerry. What training did you receive? You're both PCA pastors, having served in PCA churches, so you embark on this venture. Did IPM give you any sort of help, or do they just kind of send you off and say, "Be warm and well fed, take care of this church"?
Well, Tom would certainly say, "Be warm and well fed," but when I first met him, I think I had supper with him in Chicago several years ago, and I ate too much. But that's not the answer that IPM has any more than what Covenant Seminary or Reformed Seminary or any of a dozen other good seminaries I could mention would have for pastors. The real answer is that you need to walk in as a shepherd, and regardless of what gifts you have, if you don't walk in with the attitude of a shepherd, just seeking to love people right where they are, and then help them to recognize that, whoa, there is an elephant in that room, and nobody's wanted to deal with that for years. It has to be okay with you pastorally when you walk in with IPM to say, I'm going to help you deal with the hard questions. And even though I had all kinds of pastoral experience, and even though I had my MDiv and my DMin, you know what? I never took a seminary class that provided for me the same things that I got in a few short days of training in Chicago with IPM. It just helped me to refocus and point out the tools that were there that I would be able to use in terms of ministry for a church.
So what does the training look like? You mentioned there's a 2-day event.
Well,
Sure.
who wants to address that one? I'd like to have a summation at the end.
Yeah.
I'll just tell you the way my initial introduction to IPM was. It was really in Chicago, and we sat and talked through, first, what are the issues that are out there that are facing the churches? And then why in the world does a church need to have an interim pastor? And what are the things that an interim pastor can be doing to help a church be more focused on what it's called to be doing than the day you walked in. Knowing from the day you walk in that you're looking at your last day, that you're looking down the road saying, if this were the last day, what can I be doing? And that refocused me.
Good, good.
Let me just give you a little outline of our training. It's a 2-day event. It begins with the ministry of vitalizing churches, or in many cases, revitalizing churches, because God's given us a mission, and here it is: strengthening churches during pastoral transition for greater effectiveness. You say, oh, I thought you were going to preach and love us. We'll do all of that. But we train people in the mission that of the book of Acts, where Paul went back after the first missionary journey to see how they were doing. Implication being, maybe they're not doing so well. And then he strengthened them, it says in Acts 15. So we're kind of coming back to existing established churches to, of course, shepherd, preach, love the staff, give direction as much as we can, but also to follow a strategic plan. So we start off with revitalization, then we talk about the pivotal role of a special kind of interim pastor, one who's seasoned. We require at least 15 years of pastoral experience. This does not work for the novice. Most have 30, 35 years of pastoral experience, but they have a track record of success and of good, faithful, but here the other word, fruitful. We want both of them together in their track record. And so they can come to a church and be able to be a transformational interim pastor. We talk then about the role of IPM. We are the purveyor of God's mission through interim ministry. We're a very unique ministry. I don't know if anyone has a ministry like ours in America at this point. We need many IPMs. But we teach them just the basics of IPM so they can consider membership. And then about 3 o'clock the first day and runs next day through about 6 o'clock, we lead them through our roadmap. And this is what they're getting in order to do more than repeat their past. It's very easy for a pastor to preach old sermons. And I'm not against polishing the text and bringing it to a fresh way to a church. But we also don't want to use old ways, because most pastors have never learned the skills of transition. They don't know what they don't know. And yet we now know through 30 years of ministry, we've served over 1,300 churches. Before COVID last year, we were 90. Today we're 72 and we're building. We have at least 20 churches now in the pipeline wanting our help. We need good interim pastors. So maybe you're one of those people that's looking for your encore career. And I think this could be the icing on the cake and the cherry in the center of the cake. We teach them in that roadmap how to connect with the people, the session, the staff, the denomination, but specifically how to do listening interviews. We have targeted about 7 questions the interim in confidence can ask a church member or family that gives them great insight into the health and vitality of the church. Secondly, we teach them to form a transition team with the session, or maybe you would call it elders or deacons or council members, with them and others involved to work together on a weekly basis to look back and praise God for the great things. Look at this happen. I never even knew our church in its 10th year. I had a family called out to go to Africa. I didn't know that. Wow. But we also find, as we look back, maybe with the old pastor that just left, there's still unfinished business. Or we look back a little bit and we see an elephant under the rug that hasn't been dealt with, or it's something very blatant that must be dealt with. And then when a church gets to a place of normality, and we all have abnormalities, then we help them take action. We can't do it, but we can empower leaders and people to take whatever actions would profit this church greatly. Why wait for a new pastor who's going to step into a landmine? Let's do it now. I would want somebody to come before me to prepare the way like a John the Baptist. And so we are John the Baptist, and we're helping them take action. As a part of that transition team, we're going to look forward and pray. Without prayer, this is a very fruitless activity. But with prayer and discernment and conversation, we're going to identify our biblical mission again. We're going to clarify who we are. You got to know who you are before you can broadcast your church to others. Those are called values. And we help you think through where you'd like to be in the next 2 to 3 years. We don't do long-term planning, but if you can't express to a candidate what your desires are and hopes for in the near future, how can he come to your church and help you look at 5 to 10 years out and believe that he has a group that would be participative and supportive of that kind of endeavor? And lastly, our interims are taught how to coach. Yes, Next is a wonderful book by Vanderbloemen. Dr. Ken Moberg, who's one of our IPM interims, he has written a wonderful book called Help. Our church just lost its pastor. I'm writing a book that will be out in the spring that touches on transitions and searches. So we teach them a 5-stage process, and then we coach them. We have 30 coaches that have been credited in our organization, by our organization, the most advanced interims who are turning around while they're serving or upon their final retirement, and they're having coaching conversations, and they've been taught a process of how to coach. And they give a report, the coaches do, to my staff member that's over the coaching ministry, so that it bubbles to me when a church is having an issue that the interim, the leadership, the coach, and my director that directs coaching can't solve. And then it comes to me for my awareness. For instance, we're helping a church right now that has a music director that is of a different lifestyle. And they have known it, but it's not really who they are. And we've been trying to mitigate that there ever be a lawsuit that would infringe them or us. And it's going really well. It looks like it's working itself nicely. There's so many topics. You know, I went to a church where they were divided right down the middle of the aisle in attitude. I worked with them a year because I was their answer to not split. But after a year, they still split. Broke my heart, all that effort that seemed to be wasted. But every church can profit, I believe, and we have a process and a plan. We don't make it up as we come in. I did that in my first church in '97. Church had been 800, was down to 130, downtown Tucson, Arizona, big Gothic building built in 1928. And I just had to make it up. I knew they needed help, but I was uncertain what I should do to help them.
Yeah, no, that's great. Thank you. So, as we understand, IPM is a kingdom work. So this is not just PCA, and so your interim pastors are from a variety of denominations, and you're serving a variety of great cross section. Now, Jerry and Larry, you both have been in the PCA, and you've served as interims outside. So what has that experience been like for you as you've gone into these churches? Unmute.
Jerry, do you want that?
No, you go ahead. I've spoken. You spoke, then I'll follow you.
All right. I guess the thing that I have looked for in the churches where I've served is not where they're different from the PCA, but I look for the places where what they're doing is listening to what God's word has to say, because that's the bottom line. You could sit down at General Assembly and listen to brothers disagree about certain things again and again. And so if you put that beside you for a while and sit down and say, what is it, where are you as a church in terms of listening to God's word, in terms of doing what God's word has to say? That has helped me probably as much as anything in the churches I've served. And it didn't matter if it was a PCA church or non-denominational or what they were.
Yes, I would agree with that. I've served a variety of churches. 2 out of my 5 have been PCA. And it was just a great opportunity. We try to help a church to strengthen and be the strongest church that it can be. And we work with the denomination, we work with the church's history, we work with the church's doctrine. But we are of another professional cast. Our job is to help them be strengthened through this transition from where they are to where God's calling them in the future. And that's true of every church, because every church is the Lord's church. And so I've enjoyed my time in other churches tremendously, and help them be strengthened. So we do a variety of churches, evangelical churches, and I think we do a good job at all of them, because again, our training involves really taking on another profession. I pastored. I've been a senior pastor, church planter, missions pastor, executive pastor. I served in 2 churches over 1,000 members. And when I came to IPM, I discovered some training that created for me actually a whole new profession, and a new terminology, a new way of looking at churches, and a new way of helping strengthen them. And so we bring that to any type of church, evangelical church, that we work in.
Okay, good. I see a question here. Well, before I take the question, Dave, you've joined us, and I didn't get a chance to introduce you, as you're up there in the kind of lurking in the corners. But you have a vital role in IPM. Why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and your role and some of your experience?
All right. I've been with IPM for 13 years. I've done 7 churches all over the country. 5 of them were large, 2 of them were mid-size. Now I'm National Director for Relationships with Pastors and Denominations. And we work with over 20 evangelical denominations. And plus we're getting a lot of independent churches as independent Baptist, independent Christian churches coming our way. So we are sensitive to the polity of churches, to the theology of churches, and we try to pair up churches with proper people. I've served in 3 different denominations, my own plus 2 others, and it's a good experience. It broadens you significantly, but we also we come in not to take anybody out of a denomination, but to work with them, support their history, support their polity and legacy. So it's a great opportunity, and we're networked. I tell district superintendents and leaders that we're a turnkey operation for you, and it's like having another staff member without any expense to you, because we come in and help the church, and we keep you apprised of what's going on. We connect with you, and however you do the search, we work with you on that. So we've learned to interface with different denominations, and I think it's going well, as Jerry said.
Okay, good. Well, so what are some of the skill sets you're looking for in an interim pastor? Again, it's not something that anybody can step into. You mentioned experience, at least 15 years, but I think even with experience, there's probably something more. So what have you found, either Larry and Jerry, who've done it, that where it brings out certain skills you have, or Dave and Tom, what are some of the things you look for when you talk to people to be an interim pastor?
Go ahead, Dave.
What?
Go ahead.
Well, as Tom said, we look for somebody who has experience,
Mm-hmm.
and we want to make sure that we check the references to make sure that they meet the qualifications. And I think the value that I've seen when I did my first interim 13 years ago, we didn't have coaching. Now under Tom's leadership, we're doing that and doing it very well and thoroughly, and that really helps. I was just coaching. I have coaching calls tomorrow, and these guys, it's been an interesting challenge through COVID, and we've shared ideas, and it's been helpful. And even through COVID, they've been able to call new pastors. So I think having quality people who want to continue to serve the Lord. The value of this is that you don't have to hang on to your church until you drop or it drops. I mean, you have another encore ministry that you can move into, and it'd be very rewarding.
How long are most interim positions? Is there kind of a range of normalcy of what to expect, either for the church that's bringing somebody in or someone who's interested in this opportunity?
Tom, you want to shoot that one? You have to mute.
Usually it's 9 to 15 months. 9 months would mean the church really is in a very healthy place. And it was able to be able to identify who they needed and found the right person they perceive who they needed. But some churches need a little length, especially if they want to go through an intentional process that will prepare them better for their future and the finding and calling and retention of their next pastor. That might be a year to 12 or 13 months. Then we have the churches that are having pretty serious conflict. I know Jerry described to me today that conflict in the church he's now serving. And I go, wow, it takes a lot to, but we never stick a pastor in a church that's beyond his experience, his personality, his gifting, his temperament. We try to match them toward the needs of the church. So I've had one that took 26 months. The problem was they couldn't find a pastor. We did 9 months of extreme analysis. They took some historical actions coming out of canvassing the congregation through interviews and assessment reports. But they just had 2 or 3 false starts and got a pastor they thought would candidate, then refused because a new opportunity came, or came and candidated and then hedged his bets and went home and felt like it wasn't the best place for him. But I would say typically a year to 14 months is more typical.
So does that mean if I were to do, oh, go ahead.
Oh, Chris, I was just going to throw in, put the two together. What you look for is, I'm talking to people that talk to me about it. It takes pastoral experience, it takes fruitfulness, but I also highlight flexibility, a little bit of sense of adventure, because the 5 churches I have done, I'm from North Carolina. I did Ohio, Pennsylvania, Orange County outside New York City, Maryland. And of course, all of those, to me, from North Carolina, felt like a foreign service. And we enjoyed them all, but it takes some flexibility. Each church is different. The people are different. The region is different. You're going to be living in housing that's provided, you and your wife, if you're married. And it takes some flexibility and a sense of adventure. But the other side of that is sometimes I feel like I'm getting a paid vacation in some great parts of the country. And we love the area. We fell in love with the area, the church, the people, and all the places that we've served. And so the flexibility part, the optimism, the belief that this is the Lord's church, he's doing something in this church, and we expect to see the Lord work. And time and again, I've been told that what my wife and I brought to a church sometimes is stability and calmness, an island of peace, and sometimes in the middle of a storm, because we have a plan, we have excellent training, we have coaching, we have some experience. A lot of things that we see, we've actually seen before. And it's very helpful to tell people in a church, look, this happens in churches all the time. There's a lot of hope for the future. We're going to get through this. And the Lord is in charge. And that calming effect, which comes from experience and training, has a tremendously helpful effect on the people in the church, because sometimes they begin to wonder, well, where is this train going? And to be able to say it's going where the Lord's going to take it, because it's the Lord's church. So let's just trust him, get to work. But you got to be flexible. That's one of the things I bring out in terms of qualifications.
Yeah. You had mentioned something there about, one, the tenure, if it's, 9 to 15 months. Do I have to move? How does that work? If I were to do this, am I expected to sell my house and buy a house for 9 months or rent somewhere? Is the church responsible for it? And this somewhat then gets into question too, cost. If I'm a elder at a church, if you then could also speak to the issue of what is this going to cost our church? We don't have much money.
It takes a commitment on the part of the church, because they are contractually obligated to provide furnished housing. But again, in all 5 of my places, the congregation has come together and provided us a lovely place to live, and that's been commodious. Although there has been, you get some eclectic furniture sometime, and the flexibility. You like that, Larry?
Absolutely.
You have to have some flexibility in your housing, but again, it's so encouraging to see the church come together and provide that housing. And for example, I still own my home in North Carolina, is where we go, and because we don't know how long we're going to be at a church. And but you're in rented housing. But it also, what I found, it allows you to focus on the ministry in the church, because you're going to be busy. You're going to be doing all the duties of the pastor, plus helping lead the church through a 5-step process. And all that's going to happen in 12 to 15 months. And plus searching and finding a new pastor. But I have found it to be not only the beginning of a second career, so to speak, a new profession in addition, but I found it to be very fulfilling and very exciting to see how you can effectively help a church go to the next stage. Being a PCA, if I may quote Harry Reeder, who's at Briarwood Church and the leader of Embers to a Flame. And he's planted churches, I planted churches. And we were talking, he said the advantage of helping a church be revitalized is that a church already has presence and acceptance in the community. It has property, it has a building, it has a cadre of people that are committed to ministry. A new church plant may take 10 to 20 years to achieve that level of effectiveness. So if this church can help be revitalized and move on to the next stage of vision and effectiveness, you're 10 to 15 years ahead of where you would be in planting a church. So the opportunity for effectiveness at this stage in our lives to employ and utilize all the experience and skills that we've learned and utilize it in a church that's in a prime location and opportunity to impact their community is tremendously fulfilling. So I think the fulfillment is commensurate with the challenge, but it's worth it, more than worth it.
Yeah, it is.
Let me answer the question about what's it cost. For someone like Jerry or Larry, we ask, and for all of our interims, because most of the time we do relocate, we ask for no more, but no less than what you believe in your budget your pastor is worth. And for that amount that's in your budget, and that would be everything listed under their compensation, we ask for that piece to be sent to us on a monthly basis. There is housing they provide. If they rent, then that comes out of the package that you paid the last pastor. But we'd also ask it be salary, retirement, what you paid for health insurance and other areas of reimbursement. Because to make this work, first of all, people like Larry or Jerry, you're getting the cream of the crop. You see, they've had the initiative to come to Chicago, come to Phoenix, come to Boston, come to Orlando, come to Denver, wherever we're training, and come and sit for 2 days. And I imagine that trip would run them $1,000 and to learn. Then they make application, and we're pretty stringent about who gets into IPM. We have an application form, but we also check 5 references, a couple of them being denominational references. We also make them produce a 7-minute video so we can watch them in a relaxed way. We also ask them to provide us a full-length message that we can observe and watch. We take them through 2 short assessments to learn their spiritual gifts, especially the gifts that are most apropos to transitional ministry, and also where their passions are in ministry. We do a criminal background check. We do a reference check, and we do a credit check. It's very important that the church feel like it's safe with an unknown pastor there. So we do our best to make it something that's a passage of peace. Lead a church through a passage to their next pastor as peaceful as we can be, and to bring the church to unified peace and wholeness. So it's the same package that's in your budget, everything included. You take out the cost of housing, and then you mail it to us on the 15th of every month, 1/12 of your annual budget. And then we pay the interim, and then we provide health insurance. We do have to provide health insurance if they need it. We provide workman's comp. Just think about that. I've had a couple pastors fall and hurt themselves. Church didn't have to worry about that. We had full workman's comp. We have liability insurance in each one. We bring them back annually to Chicago for what's called our summit, 3 days of this best speaking, teaching on spiritual life, or the attributes or competencies they need to have to be an effective interim. So we built a deep ministry over 30 years that could not be replicated in just a few years. And secondly, we've gone broad because the need in America is so great. We have to address the need, and we can't be the only organization, but we want to have our full kingdom potential realized as Interim Pastor Ministries. Every 12 weeks, you get a week's vacation with us. Church agrees to it. That's when you go home and take care of things. I will just tell you that I've had interims tell me that this has been the most rewarding phase of all their ministry. Some have said, I think I've been better, and we use the word intentional because the process and the tools, I think I've been a better intentional pastor than I was a settled permanent, if there's such a thing as permanent pastor. And many have declared that it's the icing on the cake or the cherry on the icing. That's been such a blessing.
Good, thanks. There's a question here from Dave who asks about, he's been asked to serve a congregation as an interim. Now, would IPM training be available to him?
Yes, it would be. We have one coming up next week. We have 35 people signed up. It's kind of late for that one. We'll have January through the rest of the year. We'll have about 6 trainings that will need to be on Zoom calls at this point of time. Just go to our website and you will learn probably around Christmas, our whole schedule for next year. You can register and come.
So you're able to have IPM training, but it sounds like for Dave, it wouldn't be through IPM, or would he need to bring the church into the IPM sphere?
I tell you, I need PCA pastors, if that's indeed who your audience is, but I need all pastors that meet the qualifications. And I want to make a difference as a movement. See, Jerry is doing something they probably would have never had the opportunity to do. Be presented viable, great opportunities in the context of our ministry. I need pastors like that will make themselves available. I would suggest that you read a couple books. I think we're going to provide you some bibliography help in the area of transitions. Mm-hmm. You could come to our training and not leave your living room now, beginning next year. But I would truly love whoever this brother is. I mean, look at my 2 PCA pastors on this panel. Wouldn't you like a dozen of them? I would. Join us. Help us replicate this through PCA churches. Or if you have some flexibility, other opportunities through IPM that come your way. I don't know of too many groups that do what we do exactly in our training, because we give you problems that you need to know how to solve in transition, and we train you. But you also need a process, a roadmap that you can clearly explain to people about, we're here, be patient. This is the reward of this step, the reward of that step, that will ultimately lead them to a new pastor.
What about the situation in which you find yourself at a church, as you said, you just fall in love with them, they love you, you're everything they have wanted, and they say, this is the transition, you are the one we want. Does IPM have any advice or policy regarding that? Can the interim become the next senior pastor? What are the thoughts on that level?
Well, let me ask one of my interims, because this should be kind of a no-brainer, unless I ask them, they don't know the answer.
No, I'll tell you.
Yeah, go.
It's so plain. In fact, the first Sunday I'm with a congregation, what I'll tell them is that, I love you as a brother or sister in the Lord. As time goes by, I'm sure I will love you more, and I will answer for you right now. I'm not staying. That's just it. the healthiest thing I can do for you is to tell you that up front. And we're going to love each other. We're going to serve the Lord together. But you know what? I'm here to help all of us together be getting ready for the man that God has already been preparing to be the next pastor here.
And the nice thing is,
Chris, I found, wait, Tom.
I just wanted to say that all applicants sign a policy of ours, and they agree that they cannot be a candidate for this church or in the future of this church, so that we come completely objectively. Trying to call a pulpit supply works about 30 to 50% of the time because they were available down the street. We come to do what we do, speak the truth in love, and then we ride off into the sunset. Doesn't mean we won't have one or two friends maybe, but we'll not interfere in the life of the church. The church signs an agreement acknowledging that we've all agreed that our interim cannot be a candidate or be the pastor of your church permanently.
And Chris, if I may add to that, if you think about it, a lot of our effectiveness stems from the fact that we are a disinterested party. When we recommend things for a church, there's no question, is this going to be recommended for our own benefit? Because we will not be there to reap the benefits. The only recommendations we make are for the good of the church. And so it's one of our most effective aspects that I tell them from day one, I'm leaving as soon as I get here, because we have an objective to achieve, and then there's another church that needs us, and we'll be moving on. But I can't remember a church where I served that they wouldn't have loved for us to stay and told us. I was on the dais one time, and we were installing the new pastor. And one of the elders turned to me and said, well, Jerry, it's not too late. You can still stay. He's not installed yet. And that's very encouraging and gratifying. But they know from the beginning, and repeat it again, we're here to help you transition. And it would really hurt our effectiveness if they thought that we were anything other than that.
Good. Any other thoughts on that? Okay. Well, what about the again, this is across the board. Every church is different, every situation that's in transition, but a church in transition, there is always going to be a degree of pain because we don't like transition. We don't like change. How has the stress been? And as you're walking in, now you're walking in as you're saying, I'm here, but I'm not staying. So there's a little bit of, if you will, proper detachment, a proper sense. How has the stress been at serving in those situations, maybe even compared to other callings you've had?
I found it to be stressful, but it's a different kind of stress. It's stressful because sometimes you're walking into challenging situations where conflict already exists, sometimes systemic conflict. And not only that, transition, change, many people see as loss, even if it's good change. And so it's difficult for them. And then you find that different people have different ideas about what the future should look like. And some don't always take it well when they find out that their particular view doesn't become the dominant view. And so it is stress, it is challenging, but I find it a different kind of stress, because you're there for a particular purpose. And if we stick to the purpose God has called us to do, then the Lord takes us through that. So I've got some, bandages and stitches that came from being there, because sometimes the pushback comes not only to the process or the ideas, it becomes ad hominem. And you don't want to attack your brethren. You got to live with them, but the interim is the one that's expendable. And so he can be the worst person that you can attack. But at the same time, we're saying, we are not here to take over the church, to control the church. We're here to just help you get stronger. And so I found that we make it through those well enough. And again, because we're not staying, we're just there to help. And so there is a certain amount of stress in it. But particularly, I went to one church, and when I arrived, all three full-time pastors had resigned and left. And it was just me. And that is a stress all by itself. But what a great opportunity, because you can make a difference in that kind of environment.
Let me comment too, it's very important for people to understand that when they join IPM, we serve every type of church, every size church, 2,000 or 20. We're helping a church now with 30, and we've got a candidate. We're helping a church of 1,800, a number of those above 1,000, and always in between. But we want to know who you are, Pastor. If you have the gift of mercy, we're not going to send you into a church that's troubled. That's not your calling or gifting. Don't be afraid that to serve with IPM. In fact, about 30% of all of our churches don't do the 5-stage process. They hire us as traditional interims. But because you're trained, you can do certain activities, tools that you would have never known of before. About another 60% are churches that want the 5-stage intentional process. Of course, levels along that in difficulty. We try to perceive that. But most of our pastors can do those churches. Then thirdly, there's about 10% that are interventionist churches. I would say Jerry's church right now, whether he signed up to be an interventionist, he said of his churches, this is the most difficult he served. And we all have those in our history. But Jerry, I wouldn't want to fight him in an alley. You know, he might just knock lights out. But he has mercy, but he also has strength. And he can particularly deal with that. We have some pastors now that are in awful situations, but they signed up for it, and they have the naturedness, the gifting. There's a cool, calm disposition that even when everyone else is emotional, there's not much that makes them laugh or makes them cry. They have
That's a Midwesterner.
All right. So please know that we do 3 types of churches: a traditional interim, where we do everything expected, add a little value; an intentional one that leads them through a 5-stage process that will benefit them greatly; or an interventionist who will take them to the 5 stages, but they've got to stop and deal with some presenting problems that must be resolved.
Yeah, and you help create those matches. It's not up to me as figure out what I can and can't do.
Just to tell you, a church will call us on our 800 number. They will, we will schedule an intake call. I did 19 because my associate was gone last week for 9 work days. I've never seen such volume, 19. Unusual volume, but it's coming that way right now. And then I send them 8 documents after the intake call that familiarizes them with who we are, what we believe, how we operate, etc. The session, the elder board, the deacon board, the council, whatever you call your governance, they then do a conference call with usually my senior director, Todd, but I do some too. They do an hour and 15 minutes. Every question is answered before they get off the line. They have a more encompassing understanding of how it works. And then when they're through, we link them with 2 documents. One would be a church information form and a financial worksheet to see what we can anticipate and income for the pastor and for IPM. Then we do a search and we return to them 1, 2, or maybe 3 candidates. Not every church can we find 2, but we will find 1 good one. And sometimes we have more than 1 or 2, maybe 3. They make the decision, they interview the person, they bring them to town for candidating weekend. The church decides, they prepare the housing piece, and then we arrive to jump right into the saddle and to take them out to the work of the Lord.
A follow-up, kind of a wrap-up question on the interim pastor, and then want to move to the church seeking an interim pastor. But just wrapping up, there was a question earlier we had: is the PCA have a list, an interim pastor pool list? And yes, they do. I believe they have about 20 or so names. Just contact Karen Cook in the administrative committee. She can help you with that. But as we've been pointing out, the PCA as a denomination, we haven't thought along these categories as much. And the other thing is, and I'll be sending this out as well, there is a form that the AC has if you are interested in being added to that list. And I'll be including the form. I will not be sending out the list of interim pastors, as that's more of a private list. So the question in the time we have left is, I'm an elder in the church, or in the context where we're looking at transition. What do I do? What should I expect from IPM in this process? What would it feel like from the pew side, or with not just perhaps leaders, but it might even be the parishioners themselves?
If you engage us in a phone call that leads to a placement, you'll lose your sense of uncertainty. You'll experience peace that you have outsourced the seeking and finding of an interim pastor who's under accountability. So I just think that it takes the pressure off. Elders in transition overwork sometimes. They're meeting weekly in some churches because there's no pastor in place. I think we can help you refresh, regroup, be available for the congregation in a spiritual as well as a ministry way. I just think there's nothing to lose and so much more for you personally and for the church to gain. I think you'll see joy go up. I think we'll bring a spirit of hope, and the people will see what a great decision was made about the transitional pastor. They can only now believe in their hearts that you're capable of leading them by God's grace to a comparable pastor, but one who will be there for their permanent position.
Okay. When should a church talk about an interim pastor? When should that first conversation take place?
Guys, do you want me to answer this, or what have you jump in?
It strikes me, I'll answer as stated clerk of the presbytery. Okay.
Yeah.
I know of one church in our presbytery where the man who has served in that church for several years, I think 2 years ago, met with his session to begin to talk about, down the road, the Lord's blessing what we're doing here, but down the road, we ought to be thinking about what's coming next. And I could tell you, as clerk, that makes me almost dance, because it's like
Presbyterian.
Yes, yes, because in Iowa Presbytery, in the last 5 years, I think I've been involved either through IPM or just phone calls with helping either 4 or 5 churches in this presbytery, this tiny little presbytery, find new pastors. And, that's a ton for me to somehow, from a distance, be able to help them. Now, if I can take that hat off for a minute and tell you through IPM, I think I would just encourage pastors wherever you are to begin to think about what's going to be coming after I leave. No matter who you are, no matter if you've been there for 5 minutes or 50 years, that's how you ought to be thinking about your ministry time, because nobody's there forever except for our Lord. And one of the best things you can do for the church you're serving right now is to begin to look toward what's going to happen next after I'm gone.
Yeah.
It's very easy to engage us if you're interested as a pastor or as a church seeking an interim pastor. And that is just to go and call our 800 number, 800-501-7117. Google interim pastor or pastors, and we'll come up probably as number 1 right at the top of the list. It's Interim Pastor Ministries. All the contact information's there. A person can scope out our website and learn about our values, our ministry, the extensiveness of what we do. And then at that point, we're automated. I mean, we know what you need to know, and you probably don't know exactly all that you need to know, but you also ask us new questions that we answer, and we lead you through a process. We never know whether we have God's choice for you or not as an interim pastor. But I am amazed that very few churches that contact us, that ask us to do a search, I'm amazed that almost all of them receive an interim pastor through IPM.
It's 2:00.
Okay.
Well, excellent. Well, thank you very much. Unless there are any concluding thoughts, Dave, any wisdom from your years of experience, or and then Jerry?
Well, Chris, thanks for opening this opportunity up for us. We really would love to work with more PCA churches and pastors. And I can tell from my own experience, it's been a tremendous blessing to have this opportunity in this chapter of my life, so that it's a whole different game, as Jerry said so well, but we have the tremendous training to help a church at a strategic time. So I hope more people in the PCA join us.
Yeah, good. And Jerry, did you want to say something?
I was going to two things. If you're a pastor and you're reaching the point where people are looking closely at your gray hair, wondering how much longer you're going to serve, and you want to find a place of need where they look at your gray hair and say, thank goodness there's someone with experience on the site. Interim Pastor Ministries is a good place to do that. But I'm looking forward to the day when the PCA, when they began to think about succession, their first thought is, can we get a good professional trained interim in here to help us move through this transition effectively? And their first thought isn't, how quickly can we get another pastor and dump all these problems in his lap? There's a place for a professional transition expert. And we've seen too many churches that try to do it without it. And they can greatly be improved in their effectiveness and their unity if they start thinking this way. It'll take a while, but we're already seeing that process begin. And I thank you, Chris, for helping us expose it more and think through it more carefully.
Oh, my pleasure. I'm so glad we were, able to have this conversation and to see the opportunities that are out there. And so next week, we'll be back on next week. We're often every other week, but with Thanksgiving, we're next week with Randy Neighbors and the whole New City Network, in which we'll be talking about pastoring in a cross-cultural church, an obvious interest in need as well. Again, Lord bless. Thank you very much. And we will talk to you later. Bye.